Welcome to the new season of Weight Watchers shows on the Alchemy Network. This is Terry Corby from Good Business Pays, and this is the first in the new season, and we are in a season of change in the world of payment culture and payment regulations. And to help me understand what all that means and where we are, we have Sam Robinson from EY-Parthenon, and of course Liz Barclay, who is the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Lead at the Institute of Directors, but of course was the Small Business Commissioner and lots of other things, to reflect on where we are around this payment culture change journey, and to talk about the consultation, the important consultation on changes in regulation that have just completed. I just actually got off the phone with the Department of Business and Trade, and they are knee deep in examining all the feedback, lots of feedback that's coming from business, and we'll hear from Sam about some of the implications for big business around these proposed regulations, and hear from Liz, of course, who's been side by side alongside this for a long time around what she thinks it means. And I might add my own view, and you can add yours as well. So welcome, as always. And Sam, I'm going to ask you to get us started really by, I know you've been, every year you do analysis on payment culture in big business, and you show the trends. First of all, just give us a sense of the latest trends in big business and payment culture to set the scene.
Thanks, Terry. Yes, very happy to do so. So we look every 6 months at the payment reporting data, which is provided by all large companies in the UK, or is required to be submitted by all large companies in the UK. The reporting goes on a government portal. Businesses, if you meet certain size thresholds, are required to report on a number of statistics and some qualitative information every 6 months currently. And so we look at that data and look at it by sector to sort of understand how, from a large company perspective, their payments are moving. And we typically look at the three principal metrics we look at from a stats perspective to sort of build this picture. The first is average time to pay. How long on average, based on the volume of invoices, does a company take to pay, and do therefore companies across the UK take to pay? The second statistic is what proportion of invoices are paid within 30 days, 60 days, and crucially so later than 60 days, because that gives us a sense of how many invoices are sort of really paid on more extended terms. And then thirdly, what proportion of invoices are paid late by volume. And if I just sort of double click into that, we have seen on average time to pay, first of all, we've seen a steady, modest decline over the past number of years, and that trend has continued through the first half of 2025. I'd say it's modest because we're talking about on average moving from 34 days on average time to pay across all large businesses that report, down to 34.1 days at the latest average. So it is slowly ratcheting down, but if you go back a few years, that was up at sort of 37, 38, 39 days. So you are seeing a consistent trend in improvement. We also do some analysis to say, actually, is that a real movement in terms of reporting, or is that just influenced by companies which are dropping off and choosing not to report? Because there have been some instances of companies which have reported worse stats no longer or stopping reporting. And even when we just look at consistent reporters who've reported throughout the lifetime of these regulations, you see that continued reduction year on year, albeit modest. If I then switch to maybe percentage late as another metric, you have seen a more noticeable improvement in that statistic over the past few years, and that's continued in the last 6 months. So proportion of invoices paid late reduced from 26% in December 21, for example, down to 22% in the latest of 6 months to June, and that has been a consistent decline. The fact that percentage late is improving faster than average time to pay indicates that actual payment timing in the UK is not changing that dramatically, but businesses are getting more rigorous and more specific about what constitutes an on-time payment with their suppliers, so that you can get more comfort that less of those, the payments may not be faster, but there is more that has been that timing has been commercially agreed. And then proportion of invoices paid later than 60 days, that has been about the 14-15%. It's now at sort of the 11.5-12%, again nudging down over time.
Can I just ask a quick question? And I know it's something that Liz and I talked about quite a lot when Liz was in her old role, is that it sounds like payment time or time to pay hasn't changed that much, little improvement over 4 or 5 years. Percentage paid late has changed more, but is it just an accounting change where people say to their suppliers, like Travis Perkins have earlier this week, we're changing your terms from 30 days, say, to 60 days, doubling the amount of time in their contract to pay. Therefore, they're 100% on time because, they've just changed the terms of the contract.
So I think there's a few points to unpack there, Terry. So I think first point I'd say is that while you have seen the improvements in average time to pay are small, they are there. So there's generally a good news story that, in general, can't make too generous. The reporting suggests that large businesses are paying slightly faster and paying more on time. You are correct, though, in your assumption that actually that the fact that the percentage paid late has improved faster than time to pay means that more has been done to either clarify existing commercial agreements or to renegotiate commercial agreements to lock in existing payment timing, such that actually it becomes on time rather than late. So it's very difficult to differentiate between actually from the reporting what proportion is just it has been clearer communication with suppliers, better understanding in terms of what constitutes on time, what has been commercial changes over that period. But you are right that the reason percentage late has improved faster than average time to pay is because businesses are focusing more on what constitutes late payment and therefore adjusting their commercial structures to try and reduce late payments. Now, is that a good thing? I think getting more visibility and more certainty on when you're going to be paid is only going to be a good thing. That what we need to try and avoid is that is at the detriment of the time to pay.
Liz, views on this?
Well, I have always, throughout my 4 years as a Small Business Commissioner, appreciated Sam's insights into all of this. Just to pick up one point though, Sam, you mentioned a drop-off in reporting because companies are choosing not to pay. The thresholds for reporting went up, which took quite a few companies out of reporting, so they no longer have to report. And also there are likely to be moves by some of those companies to set up different entities that don't have to report. So that may be a choice, and that may be changing the results too. But also I think that in the economic environment we're in, it's possible that there are some companies that are simply dropping out of reporting because they're no longer as big as they once were. I am slightly worried about companies, as you mentioned, Terry, changing their contractual terms from 30 to 60 days. That's not the only one we've heard about recently. Simply sending out an email to all of their suppliers saying, you used to be paid in 30, now you'll be paid in 60. I did a bit of a check on that particular one you mentioned, to be told by the industry that it's more likely to be that that particular company is struggling to get paid itself by some of its customers because of the environment, the macroeconomic environment in the construction sector. And we are seeing huge drop-off in work levels and so on in the construction sector. And in fact, just before we came on, I got a message saying that the construction sector, work in the construction sector is at a 24-year low, partly because of lack of ability to get started, etc. All the things that the government's trying to address. So the environment, the economic environment really does have a big impact on how companies react. And of course, Sam's looking at the companies that are reporting. There are millions of other companies in the UK for whom those figures won't chime because obviously, you know, everybody does their own survey with their own cohort of small and medium-sized businesses, etc. How quickly are they getting paid? There are surveys that say payment times are going up. There are surveys that say that payment times are lower than Sam's suggested from the data that he's been analysing. So, you know, it's really hard to get a complete picture. And of course, the government's own figures came out in July. And we have to remember that technology has made a big difference over the years in the length of time that it does take people to get paid, because Sam, you were saying 37 days on average a couple of years ago, a few years ago, down to 34 as far as your analysis goes, and that's great. We have actually seen over the past 30 years probably, or even 15 years, a big drop in time to pay from even to the point of 80 days, would you believe, down to 30 days. And so there has been a big shift. Question is, for the small business at the bottom end, is it ever going to be fast enough?
Completely agree, Liz. And actually, just to pick up on a couple of things that you said there, and there's some questions in the chat around sector. It's very easy to talk in generalizations here because of the volume of businesses in the UK and the volume of reporters. Clearly, there is a very different picture in different parts of the economy. And if I just take sectors, for example, that average time to pay of 34 days is an average. If you broke that out into individual companies, you've got some who are paying exceptionally fast within 5 to 10 days, and some who are paying exceptionally, quote unquote, slow in above 90 days, for example. Actually, and Terry, I know you, as Good Business Pays, you do quite a lot of work in terms of looking at calling out those good performers and poor performers. If I think about sectors, you've got financial services at one end of the spectrum who traditionally don't have as much focus around cash and working capital, who are at sort of the speedier payers at sort of not average of 19, 20 days. And then you've got, I want to say, the usual suspects at the right-hand side who have had a strong focus on working capital, who generate a lot of their, from an industry perspective, generate a lot of their business from maximising their balance sheet. And these are people like the advanced manufacturing companies, the consumer product companies, the food and beverage companies, some of the pharmaceutical companies who have a longer time to pay, above 45 days on average. So that picture, when we say 34 days from a large company, it is an average. And if you look at sectors, you do have that discrepancy. The second thing I just wanted to pick up on, Liz, was you saying actually the number of reporters. It is done at an entity level currently, this reporting by the government, and it is a concern that we haven't got compliance here. I know DBT are working hard to address that. They've got a small team, and I expect we'll see some public action in due course on this fact. But that is the part of the rationale for some of the changes which are coming through in the coming months.
I got a question actually prompted by a question that Alex put forward, which was, and we've asked it before, which was about incentives for senior management, C-levels to save cash, which then goes directly into their annual bonus in some cases in their pay packet, not asking them how they achieve that cash result, but just actually putting the bonus in to their pay packet. Now, we're doing some research at the moment with what we call our serial fast payers, those companies that pay fast and have done every year in the last 5 years since we started Good Business Pays, and they come from across industry, not just from financial services. Important to say, they come from transport, they come from chemicals, they come from hospitality, and without question, when asked about whether any of their executives or any of their people have incentives around payment performance, the answer is always no, that they just do it. Yet other companies clearly do. And so I am seeing this trend of Good Business Pays where the good in our terms, of course, is paying fast and fair. The good are tending to do better, and the bad are tending to do worse. And so there's a split. And Sam, I suspect a lot of the bulk of the companies that you're looking at in your analysis are somewhere in the middle, right? They're that sort of 80%, not the extremes of good and bad. But any idea why this kind of split in culture sort of exists?
I mean, it's a fascinating question. I think we do see that gap widening slightly by the good sectors getting better and the poorer performing sectors at least stagnating rather, or in some cases going backwards, but most cases keeping that level. I think it boils a little bit down to understanding the focus of senior management on this as a topic, and understanding the value that is associated with it. So I think the companies which pay well, for example, either have driven that link and use their fast payment as a commercial advantage with their suppliers. So I know a number who use it as almost a differentiator for competition in the market. We will pay on time, we'll pay quickly, and that is why you choose to work with us. And they may get, as off the back of that, other commercial benefits like first dibs on new work, or sort of a different work, or a better price perspective. So that is certainly a lever that is used by some businesses to sort of, we actively pay fast because it gives us a commercial advantage over our businesses. And on the flip side, you also see the reverse, where if you've got directors tend to be incentivized to create value for the shareholders in general, and in terms of value, you've got profit is sanity and cash is reality. So cash, as a cash practitioner, I would always recommend that cash is a metric there for senior management, but you do have to then be careful how it is used and what behaviours it's driving.
Are you seeing that with your directors at the IOD, Liz, in terms of aligning with those values?
I'm more or less agreeing with what Sam has had to say, but I do think that directors who at board level ask the questions are fairly few and far between. I think there's still a disconnect in thinking between directors thinking about payment performance as painting them a picture. I always say look at the figures and tell, because they'll tell you the story, but not always do directors and boards and so on think about payment to suppliers as being part of those figures and part of that picture. So I think you see it yourself, Terry, and you've done some research around this, where you see leadership. And I can give one good example of a situation where a leader, a new chief executive came in, asked to see the payment performance figures, and instantly said, no, we've got to change this, because otherwise we're not going to be able to compete, as Sam's saying. We won't get the best talent wanting to work with us. We won't get the best suppliers wanting to work with us. We won't have that loyalty. We need to be working in partnership with these suppliers and really understand what it is that they're up against, how they're delivering for us, because otherwise we're not going to have that particular product or service available to our own customers. And that payment performance changed dramatically over a very short space of time. You've looked at that. The other thing you've also looked at is financial situation within a company, and how extending your payment terms could actually be a signal out there to prospective suppliers, etc., that things are not good within the company. So, and you know, you've tied those two elements together in some of the research that you've done, where we have seen big companies go to the wall a few months after they have extended their payment practices. So there's an awful lot of elements here to be taken into consideration, and the more directors know about how the operation is functioning, the more likely it is that they can identify signals that tell them the story.
Yeah, and we are starting to see examples where people are talking about their suppliers as an extension of their customer service now.
Yes.
Right. This is a it's been there all along, right? If you go back in time, you can see great examples of this in certain companies, but that recognition that as times get tough and you have to sometimes cut back on your workforce numbers, the ability to be able to pick suppliers that can improve your own customer service or products to market for your customers, that's an important thing. And getting that partnership right between big company and smaller ones, big company and innovative small suppliers is going to be really important. And obviously payment is part of that. In the US, they'd say it's the ticket to the game, but it's not the whole game. It's
and we saw that during the pandemic, Terry, because there were big companies that looked at their supply chain and thought, if we don't pay them quicker, they're going to go to the wall, or they're going to go to the competition. And just what Sam has been saying there, they then found a way to pay them much more quickly in order to make sure that they had those products and services as the pandemic went ahead. So we've seen it. And it can work, but then again, it's at the expense of other departments in a big organization who then come back and say, hang on a minute, you know, we've been neglected, we haven't been able to put money into research and development, for instance.
I think that's it. I think that understanding the link between payments and commercial value is key to be able to sort of change culture, because you have, on the one hand, you have the good payers who are linking it, who have got a commercial advantage from paying faster. But if you don't have that, actually the incentive, as I think Alex put in the chat, is to preserve cash, because that will directly drive value in the balance sheet. So if you don't have that as a commercial, if you don't see that as the commercial, we need to create other incentives, other commercial imperatives to sort of control the excesses of around payment that exist in some parts of the market. And I think that maybe that links into some of what where the government is going with this, and different perspectives on what's going on, I suppose.
And we haven't mentioned investors yet, because if investors are looking to invest, then one of the things that they may take into consideration is how well are you supplying and supporting and partnering with your supply chain, because that is making a much more resilient, sustainable company to invest in the first place, with ethics, doing the right thing.
So let's move on to what the government is looking to do, hoping to do, trying to do. First question, I mean, Sam, from your perspective, why is the government making these proposed changes or proposing these changes? Just what's the point of it?
Well, I think in a nutshell, because there has been a trend over the past 20 years of increasing regulation and action in the space of payments, both in the UK but also across Europe, as different governments grapple with the challenge that actually there is a lot of value tied up in the economy for big businesses, but particularly for small businesses, where if we can unlock that potential, that is perceived to drive GDP growth. And particularly for SMEs, where they employ a significant proportion of the workforce, the voting population. It's a political winner across parties as well. So there is a lot of political momentum here around actually increasingly we're taking different actions. It's not accelerating cash in the way that we would necessarily like, and so we're looking at different alternatives. Now, if I just pause, there has been, particularly in the UK, there's been a lot in the last, different actions in the last 12 months, some of which have still to come through, and there is further a lot which is being planned, which has different potential different consequences. Is it worth me just setting out some of those changes which are happening currently, Terry, before we get into what's being consulted? Because you've you've got, I suppose, if I just take what's happened in 2025, you've had changes to payment practices reporting. So some of that large company reporting, which I've alluded to. So we're starting to see companies report on both a value basis and a volume basis, which gives us a sense of how much value is tied up in long or late payments, and to what extent companies are making different choices by different types of their suppliers. Are they paying large value invoices later or even faster? And what does that mean? And what behavior do we want to drive? That's interesting. We're starting to see reporting on retentions, which was sort of, again, new disclosure requirements brought in by the government. So if I bucket that into additional visibility, we're starting to see that. It's still very early days. It'll take the next 12 months before we really understand across the whole population of large companies what that looks like. If I think about public payments or public contract regulations, we've had the Procurement Act go live, which is put in mandating 30-day terms for government suppliers. And actually, the interesting bit that is, if you are a subcontractor on a project which is a government project, you also have to pay your suppliers on 30 days. So for some of those construction companies, that has forced more acceleration on those government contracts down through the supply chain, which has had a significant impact. And then thirdly, I think there's, as announced last year, there is a move to
Did we lose Sam?
It looks that way, Terry.
Wait for him to come back. One thing I did want to ask about, actually, that Sam talked about was the.
He's there.
Can I drop off temporarily there? Apologies. I've got to.
Yes, I think you were just starting to talk. You just talked about the Procurement Act.
Okay.
And then that's where we sort of lost you.
Thanks, Terry. I suppose the third, and then I will stop whiffling on because it is a personal favourite topic of mine. The third key change this year is annual reports. So,
we've lost him again.
I'm back again. I don't know what's going on here. All large companies will have to report their payment practices in their annual reports from January next year. And that will be a significant shift, which will hopefully drive up compliance of reporting.
Can I just check? I think I'm right in saying, and I know that Liz has corrected me on this, that bit about companies having to report their payment performance in annual reports was not part of the recent consultation that has to happen from January or February, or am I wrong?
No, that you're right, Terry. That is already law. That was passed by the House of Lords and House of Commons in October this year, so it will come into effect from January. There's a slight nuance in that it was going to be put in the director's report, and then we've just heard that the director's report is going to be abolished instead of reporting updates. So, but I think that the view is that in some form there will be reporting on payment practices will need to be included within annual reports. Exactly how that works, because you've got entity level reporting and then companies will be publishing group sets of accounts. The details are a little bit messy and not quite clear at this stage, but the sentiment is that this will then help improve compliance with reporting and improve visibility at a board level and an audit committee level of payment practice reporting.
And where
Yes,
will
Terry, there were two versions, Terry. There's the one that came in January, the actual reporting that's passed by the House of Lords. There's the extension of that, and as to whether or not audit committees have responsibility, should have responsibility, who should have responsibility at board level for the reporting of the payment performance, and that's part of the consultation.
This is, I'm sticking on this for a little bit because a lot of people will listen to this afterwards. I'm sure this will be very interesting to them because the work that they do, rather than just going into a report to DBT every 6 months, someone from the company secretary's office will say, give us those figures, because they're going to go in to page something of our corporate document. And having worked in corporate communications for many years in large companies, everything that goes in there has to be accurate. Because it's going to be seen by the shareholders and the investors and all the important folk. That business around, let's say, entity level reporting, Sam, where some companies we see have many entities that they report their payments performance through. How will that get sorted through in terms of who will determine whether it's the PLC that actually reports its payment performance? Most of those invoices are to entities they own, so they can say we pay really fast, or at the operational level where they might pay really slow. How will that get sorted through?
The short answer, Terry, is I don't know yet. I don't think there has been, and if I've missed it, please, somebody on this call, let me know, but I haven't seen detailed guidance on actually what the format of that disclosure will need to be. But you're right. I think if you're a group, I would imagine you would want to disclose all of the entities that you report for, with a view on which is the, or at least a view of an indication on therefore which is the most material entity. So you can direct your readers of your corporate account, and actually therefore readers, people who are searching for reporting on the government portal, to actually the most representative view of your external payment practices.
Yeah. I suspect, though, given that every entity will still need to report to DBT, so that will be on the full set of reports, that if you've got 17 entities and you only report the best one in your annual reports, certainly an organisation like Good Business Pays will be able to point that kind of thing out quite easily.
Yes.
So on to the consultation bit. So you've talked about the things that actually are already law, have become law. But on the consultation bit, I know you've done a couple of webinars recently at EY around the things that have been concerning, or should be big business should be concerned about, or at least aware of. Would you like to take us through those, because they're important?
Thanks, sir. Yes, we have done a webinar at the end of September. I'm sure I can share the link with people who want, if you want to listen again on that. I think it's really primarily around raising awareness, because these are what the government is consulting on, would be fundamental changes to how businesses operate in the UK. There are different perspectives. There is potentially a very large impact, financial impact and operational impact of some of these changes. Whether you agree with them or disagree with them, they potentially have a material impact on your business. So you should be aware at the very least. And if I look down the eight and a half measures that the government is consulting on, maybe just rather than going through all of them for this call, just to pick out a few, the ones which grab the headlines are legal maximum on payment terms. So maximum of 60-day payment terms as a hard stop. Previously, up to this point, both in the UK and across the EU, you've been able to negotiate whatever payment terms you like, effectively, as long as it's not grossly unfair with a supplier. And that has led to, certainly in some instances, perception that businesses have exercised their imbalance of power to force businesses to take extended payment terms. So you do see some very long payment terms, particularly in some of those sectors I talked about earlier, of 90, 120, 180 days, certainly, which is not the intention when government was setting out grossly unfair back in the 90s. However, that is quite a big change. There is a significant value of capital currently paid on more than 60 days, which maybe I can come back to. I say the other two changes we were worth drawing attention to is mandatory charging of late payment interest. So actually, you'd force companies, you are able to charge interest on a late payment, but this would become mandatory, so forcing companies to both pay and collect late payment interest. Whereas in practical terms, while that provision exists currently, I'd say 99.99% of companies waive that interest. And I think thirdly, the other one I'd pick up as there's some bits around, there's bits about retentions, there's some bit around dispute timing, there's some bit around additional reporting. But the one which is getting attention is that attention of boards and audit committees and requiring them to focus on payment practices. So if you will indulge me 5 minutes, I will just very quickly talk about what some of that impact could be. So we've looked at the government was asked for, consulted to understand what the impact could be and unintended consequences of these potential changes. If you just take maximum payment terms, when we looked at the data which had been reported on government websites, I'd say 93% of large businesses had some level of exposure of payments made greater than 60 days. So actually this, while it's sort of only affecting payments over 60 days, this would affect nearly all large companies in the UK in terms of having some level of impact. While when you look at the proportion of invoices paid late, by value, only 9% of invoices are paid late in 60 days, which is a good thing. That is what we want. We want to reduce that further if you're trying to speed cash up in the economy. So only 9%, so relatively small proportion, but that has a significant value. So it's estimated that off that equates to approximately £500 billion worth of capital paid on later than 60 days. If you extrapolated that up against the non-reporters and small businesses, annually £500 billion is paid on later than 60-day terms. So if you accelerated that by even 15 days, that would have a £23 billion impact on the economy, which is about 1%, just under 1% of GDP. So that would be a good thing. If on one sense that's what the government is targeting, to try and accelerate that cash, but that is a seismic change to push through the economy in one go, and may have some dislocation, because if you look at it then at a sector level, you've got a very different impact across sectors, both by sectors exposed to greater than 60-day terms, and also sectors which have a natural hedge and not. What do I mean by that? So if you're a retailer, you are paid instantly by your customers, typically as you buy your coffee on your credit card. But if you're a manufacturer of cars selling to car distributors overseas, you will get paid on credit terms. So you may see an acceleration in what you pay out to your suppliers, but you should get an acceleration back from your customers. You don't have that in all sectors. So the effect is not going to be standard across sectors. I think even within sectors, you're going to have there's a very large distribution of companies which will be significantly impacted, and those that won't. And some of the unintended consequences here are around potentially businesses which have weaker capital structures already will be pushed to the edge. There's some thought constraints that actually, if you push down on just payment terms but not looking at payment timing, does that play a bit of legal whack-a-mole, and you're pushing problems from one part of the payment process, to other parts of the process? And thinking about as well, actually, if you're setting maximum terms of 60 days and a normal therefore of by maximum we're having 60 days, are you going to encourage companies to do what the company you're referring to earlier is doing, and increase terms elsewhere to offset the benefit of the reduction? So you might end up, and if you did that, so if everybody moved their terms up to 60 days, you would have a much more material outflow, and it would cause the UK even more problems. So the theoretical maximum, well, you might have a benefit of 23 billion. The theoretical maximum outflow, if everybody moved up to 60 days, is more like 300 billion. Now that would never happen, but it shows that this is not a straightforward topic to legislate, and there may well be some significant economic unintended consequences around this. And I think, Terry, that points to some of the reason why the DBT have had so many feedbacks, which is great. It's exactly what they wanted. They wanted to get, it's a proper consultation. They've got lots of views fed in, and so they'll be able to therefore make a more informed decision on maximum payment terms. Let me pick up very quickly then statutory interest and audit committees. Statutory interest has some interesting unintended consequences, because less from a financial perspective, but operationally, it is going to be extremely challenging for both large businesses and small businesses, I think, to track these interest charges. Because if you imagine most businesses are struggling already to track the late payments and what they're paying late. Technologically, our IT systems are not set up to be able to identify and then calculate and charge a interest rate, which may change multiple times in the year because it's based on the Bank of England base rate, to work out what interest is applicable and then create an invoice for it and create an owing for it, and therefore be able to pay against it. So while I completely agree with the sentiment, the practicalities of that change may be very difficult without adding a significant administrative burden. And then finally, just on audit committee scrutiny, there is an element of some of the feedback which we've seen has been around, there is so much on their plates. How is this, if at a group level necessarily, how do we ensure that their focus is targeted in the right way, particularly when your timing of reporting is not necessarily aligned. So your group financial accounts, which is where these audit committees and board reviews are sort of naturally currently scheduled, doesn't necessarily tie in with the deadlines for reporting on payment practices. So to require them to review before submission would be require additional meetings and additional time. And it's whether that is the best, most effective way to ensure that you've got director's review. Don't forget, on payment practices, the directors of the company are already criminally liable for the existing reporting. So I think there needs to be, and the government are doing some more thinking at practically how do we make this relevant and raised at the right level to get appropriate scrutiny of these metrics.
Let me give you a chance to have a little pause there, because that's a whole lot of very, very useful thinking, information, and relevant feedback. Liz, I mean, you sat obviously close and watched this develop over the last 4 years or so, and what we're trying to do, we as a society, I think, not we on this call, is trying to improve payment culture in large organizations. How helpful or not are these things, do you think, as it relates to big business, recognizing it's a big change?
I think, thank you, Sam, for filling in some of the detail. I think the department has had an unprecedented, there's an overused word, number of responses to its consultation. It only closed on the 23rd of October. But I think there's thousands rather than hundreds. And so they're wading through all of those consultations responses at the moment. And I think that really indicates, because that's vastly increased from the last consultation about 5 years ago, and a big increase from the payments and cash flow review that we did in 22-23. So I think what really is interesting is how much more aware people are of this and how much more important it has become and how it's been pushed up the agenda. And I think that's because of the reporting into the department. The figures that Sam analyses, I think it's awareness raising on the part of the Small Business Commissioner. I think, Terry, it's partly down to the work that Good Business Pays does as well, with fast payers and slow payers. We have become much more aware of. But what we still haven't really understood is that big businesses are so vastly different from the suppliers who supply them, and that small businesses, particularly the very, very smaller end, are vastly different from those big businesses, and there is a lack of communication and understanding between the two. Anything that can help that understanding as to how the processes work in each has got to be really useful. So when we are talking about how it should be reported at board level, then obviously there are going to be a lot of different views on that. But it's really great that the government is thinking about that and grasping it, because it's all the more important that directors see it. But it's also all the more important that small businesses get a chance to say, this is why we need paid much more quickly. Because right at a basic fundamental level, it's really hard for somebody in accounts receivables or a procurement or accounts payable who don't even know what each other do in a big business to understand why a small business might need to be paid in 7 days. And Harold, there's a question here from Harold. Are we not in an age where current generation of employees will not accept or allow bad behaviour of large companies? Unfortunately, the fact is most employees go in at 9 to 5 to do their job and are not fully aware of what happens in the rest of that organisation, because a lot of them are so vast. But I mean, even, you know, medium-sized businesses have up to 250 employees. Each does their job. So it's really about trying to get a lot more of this out there so that everybody fully understands that the small business that doesn't get paid in 30 days and is waiting for 60 days and possibly much longer, depending on the process, is likely to go to the wall, but they're certainly not going to have the certainty to know when they're going to get paid to be able to invest. And that's why the government is so interested in this. Why is there such a lack of investment on the part of small businesses, and why has productivity dropped off to the level that it has? But if you don't know when the money is going to come in, how do you know what you can spend and invest? And if the small businesses and the small suppliers are able to invest in better skills, better training, better equipment, better products, whatever that might be, then that goes back up. That value adds back up the supply chain. And that's why it is so important. And I think that's why you asked, why now? I think that's partly why now. There are 5.7 million small businesses in this country, and they employ between them 50% of the private sector workforce. This is a fundamentally important issue that the government's got to get to grips with. It's trying very hard. On the mandatory interest thing, Sam, I absolutely agree with you. It is hugely complicated. But if we could even get to a point where big businesses weren't allowed to make you contract out of the capacity to charge that level of interest, that would be one thing. So there may be little things that come through this consultation that the government hasn't actually talked about much yet that may spark off different thinking. The consultation has got a long way to go before we actually see the outcome of that. And some of the outcomes may need legislation, which in itself takes time to get through. So we're nowhere near the end of this yet. And I hope you've had your say as to how you feel that this should play out.
There was a question came in about the timing, and what I heard from the department this morning was that they've sorted through a lot of the responses. They'll be putting their thoughts to the ministers early in the new year of, what they've heard and what the recommendations might be. So I think you're probably looking at, I'm just sort of guessing, springtime or something, the first half of next year, to see what the choices are going to be. But then, of course, it needs to go to legislation. So that'll be maybe next year, 2026, 2027, that sort of.
And then there'll be an implementation period, Terry, because as Sam has pointed out, this is a big change for businesses, and they do need time to be able to get that through and make sure their processes can accommodate those changes.
So, and the last 5 minutes and talking about businesses changing, and I always say to government, you know, regardless of what you do, businesses will do what they'll do because they have customers waiting outside their shop for the door to open every day. There's been quite a lot of debate in recent times around how you change payment culture. And of course, at Good Business Pays, what we've tried to do over the last 5 years is we focus on what good looks like through reward and recognition. And we also, for balance, focus on what bad looks like to call out bad behavior and say, you know, that's not right, that shouldn't be done. And we found that both of these levers actually make a difference in terms of trying to, but there has been some chatter more recently around, well, naming and shaming actually harms, doesn't do any good. So I'm interested, I'm going to ask you first, Sam, you've seen this over the past 4 or 5 years change. From your perspective, your personal or company point of view, whatever you like, which levers work and how?
So, thanks. So from it's probably more personal than company, but my personal view is if you can make it a commercial imperative, that is the single most influential lever in changing a company's payment behavior in either direction, actually. So businesses which are strapped for cash and need cash now, actually, they may, if they're in crisis, and Liz alluded to this might be where they ask their suppliers for extensions to sort of get through a crisis moment. Similarly, if they understand where we've seen the most improvement in payment performance has been where it's directly linked to the commercial incentives. And I'll give you an example. In the construction sector, actually the government changed its contracting guidelines, which says if you want to be a public sector supplier, you need to meet this hurdle rate on your payment practice reporting. You need to pay 95% now within 60 days, and they're layering in additional requirements, and that is critical for some of the big contractors in construction, because if they can't get access to those large government contracts, then that directly hits both their revenue, their bottom line, and their cash flow, and would get hold of the cost for shareholders. So that has already got broad focus and attention, and you have seen, particularly at those large contractor levels, a big shift then in how they're paying their suppliers, at least the first level of the supply chain, in terms of pushing less than 60-day terms, pushing average time to pay down. Whereas previously they might have leveraged their balance sheet to drive additional returns, that business model has shifted, and that's all mainly driven by the commercial incentives for public sector contracts. I mean, they have got active trade presses, and but I'd say that has been the primarily lever. I think where it's less effective, where it's just where you haven't got that trade press, you haven't got that pressure, you haven't got that commercial lever, that's where naming and shaming has had less impact. And so if you take some of the large consumer products companies, which have for a long time now been focused on driving longer and longer terms through their supply chain. So I talked earlier about 120, 180-day terms, but sometimes in some of those businesses, if they are named and shamed, it only starts to I mean, it's what I'm saying, it has less of an impact, I think, actually. And you saw when we went through the first round of naming and shaming about the prompt payment code, that we got a number of companies leave that code and not change their behaviour, and that is not sort of the desired outcome from that activity. But in terms of, therefore, if I go back to what your question, Terry, I think the commercial lever is by far the most important.
Very useful. Liz, your thoughts on this?
Yes, I would agree absolutely with Sam, but there is also a need amongst peer organisations to be seen as being better on the league table as somebody else. And so, you know, that league table publication can make a difference. What we discovered at the Office of the Small Business Commissioner was that because there is no there's no imperative for them to contact us. So therefore, if we, under the prompt payment code and now under the fair payment code, if we contacted a big company, they didn't have to engage with us. And quite often, if we called them out as badly behaving, they simply wouldn't engage in future. But you, Terry, have a totally different experience, because when you talk to companies, you're talking to them about their payment practices. It's raising awareness. It's actually increasing their understanding of the small suppliers that they're dealing with. And so they do want to be rewarded for improving. It depends in the context. It's a very nuanced thing. Naming and shaming, I always think it's better to be naming the good guys and getting them on that league table and getting them to compete as to where they sit on it, than it is necessarily to call out the bad guys. And just an example from yesterday, somebody actually went to prison for a particular misdemeanor, came back out, registered again in their sector, and got an enormous amount of work, because consumers remembered the name but did not remember why that person's name was familiar, and simply thought, oh, I'll go and work with them. So it can backfire, and it has to be really managed carefully and properly. We haven't mentioned the fair payment code, which has replaced the prompt payment code. People want to be on it. It is much harder to get onto than the prompt payment code, but they still work hard and want to be on it. And just because you said it's the last 5 minutes, I just wanted to say, Terry, we haven't mentioned the e-invoicing consultation, which will also be reporting hopefully before the end of the year. But again, there is a question, is the government going to mandate e-invoicing? Because if they were to do that, then that is possible. It is possible that those kind of systems might speed up payment practices.
Completely agree.
Quickly.
I think that's a great call out, Liz, because that, I think if the government's thinking about what else, if not this, then what else, I think that is a key area where we can drive improvements through the supply chain.
But on saying that, Sam, lots of companies are using e-invoicing already and having a real problem getting their small suppliers onto the system, because they still want to invoice by paper. And of course, if you're a small supplier and you're thinking about cost and inconvenience to you, and you've got 6 different customers that you supply, then you are a bit reticent to step forward on that. And will the government mandate it? Possibly not. We don't know until the consultation comes out.
I think that the introduction of new technologies, having worked at Accenture for many years, is a brilliant thing, but there's always a human at the end of it that has to use it and engage with it. And the psychology of change is always fascinating to me. And I regarding the Fair Payment Award, it's always interesting that even though it's there, and I've worked for many chief executives in my time, I can't think of any of them that would want to be bronze. They are a very competitive lot around
but
the
they want to be on the code, and the idea of getting bronze is they'll get silver next time, and then gold.
You try telling that to some of the CEOs I've worked for. Hey, listen, this is brilliant. What a great discussion. Thank you, Sam, for all those insights. So good to have you here. And Liz, again, you've been close to this forever. So really good to have your insights here. Thank you.
Maybe not forever, Terry. It just feels that way.
It does. It certainly does feel that way. Thanks for those that joined. And I know thank you to those many that listen afterwards. Thanks very much for joining today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Terry.